I know we're missing a couple of board members, but hopefully they'll join us here shortly. So thank you all. Good afternoon. I do apologize for the mix-up on time. I'll take credit for that, for not catching the notice and the change in time. So I apologize for that. I'll do better next time. But I appreciate your flexibility and your grace. And Dr. Weisman, I appreciate your flexibility as well. But I appreciate everybody. So we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Thank you. Good afternoon. It is Friday, February 5th, Red Friday. It is 3:34 p.m. We are in our special meeting this afternoon. So welcome to my board colleagues and to Dr. Weisman. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Miguel, and to anybody that is watching us out in the public as well. So Ms. Smith, would you do a roll call, please? Oh, and I'm sorry, before we do that, I will read our board norms and protocols as we do at every board meeting. As a board, we agree to respect the differences of opinions in making decisions for the district, to follow best practices in managing the superintendent and the management of the board itself, to stay on task when conducting business for the district, including while at board meetings, to never surprise the superintendent or each other when conducting official business of the district, to read these norms at the beginning of each board meeting and at board workshops as a reminder of how to conduct our meetings, and to continually self-check to determine if we are following our norms when conducting district business. And now, Ms. Smith, would you do a roll call, please?
Yolanda Clark.
Yolanda Clark, present.
Maxine Drew.
Maxine Drew, present.
Janie Humphreys.
Janie Humphreys, present.
Randy Lopez.
Randy Lopez, present.
Wanda Brownlee Page.
Wanda Brownlee Page, present.
Dr. Nguyen.
I think she's in a legislative meeting.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Yeager.
Stacy?
Yeah, she was on. She dropped off, it looks like. So hopefully she'll join us again.
Okay.
All righty. I would entertain a motion to approve today's special agenda.
So move.
Second.
All right, Ms. Smith.
Just one moment. Yolanda Clark.
Yolanda Clark, yes.
Maxine Drew.
Maxine Drew, yes.
Janie Humphreys.
Janie Humphreys, yes.
Randy Lopez.
Randy Lopez, yes.
Wanda Brownlee Page.
Wanda Brownlee Page, yes.
All right, thank you.
Dr. Yeager's here now with Ms. Smith.
I'm sorry, Dr. Yeager.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, again, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Weisman, we love that you were spending your Red Friday with us. So thank you for joining us and welcome back. So with that, I'll go ahead and just hand it off to you. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here. Boom, boom. Okay. It seems like every time I share it, then it gets slower to respond. Okay, there we go. Whoa, that was the longest black screen. Okay, can you see it all right, or what are you seeing?
It's very small.
Yeah, it's very small.
So let me do something. I added a monitor and I wasn't sure what it would do. So let me unplug.
Is it a PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, and I think
it's gonna get bigger if you hit present.
So.
If you go up to slideshow.
Let's see.
Up there.
Yeah, I had to undo. I am sorry to do this to you. You guys are my first workshop since I just got this monitor. And it is, darn it, I'm sorry. So sorry. I feel like I've said this to you before. Okay, where'd my PowerPoint go? No, there we go.
Go to slideshow and then
Is it still slow? I am so sorry. I'm going to stop share and go again. I apologize for wasting your time. I was trying to get more efficient by getting this new monitor.
You get used to having a second monitor. You'll never go back to just having one.
Especially with my very old eyes, they have trouble seeing on just this one.
My kids have second monitors for school.
Oh, good. Oh. Okay. And I'm not sharing right now, right? So you can't, or can you see it?
No, you'll have to share again.
Okay, I couldn't, oh my goodness, so sorry. You would think by now. Okay, how are we cooking with gas?
Yep, looks good.
All right, there we go. Sorry about that. Okay, and I was going to try to really keep us moving today, so not to keep you too late. So, bottom line, want to get you to some goals here for moving forward and, establishing these future priorities, and then move on with the DISC stuff that we did, kind of do the next steps. So, moving forward, I have to quickly do our little connection activity. And so and this is one I've done with you before, and I wonder if everybody would just share one lens that they're bringing today that might be something that they're looking at the world through that might not be what everybody thinks of them as, since we're going to kind of do DISC later. What's part of the way you view the world that might not be known to everybody else?
I would say my lens would be from a higher education perspective, as well as America and a parent that works virtually from home.
Okay, so the pandemic's added some opportunities for some new lenses.
Right, and someone who takes care of their grandma who's 80, she'll be 88 years old this year. So my lens is a little different.
Okay, thank you. Someone else just want to jump in?
My lens is patience. I'm always wanting things to happen in a hurry, and it doesn't. And so I'm trying to be patient, and then to see that in others whom I meet.
Okay, so
that I can learn from them.
So you're developing that lens.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Someone else want to just jump in?
I don't mind jumping in. I'll speak from definitely a parent of two that are here doing school at home. Also having an adult child makes a difference. Being a wife and also working. And then my lens changed even this week. And I say this more just since we're talking about lenses, not for any other purpose, but I lost a very close family member this week, which Dr. McGill, I owe you an apology. I lost my mother-in-law this week. So my lens is also changing from that perspective. My husband is an only child. So what does that look like for future? So.
Mm-hmm.
So sorry.
Yes, I'm sorry to hear that. And I guess one of the things I'll just piggyback on yours is a friend of mine just lost his dad this week, and how it triggers then. And so like I re-grieve, not that I was ever done, but it takes you back again to that process of when you lose a parent. Okay, someone else want to jump in? Janie, I see your brain moving.
Janie's brain's always moving.
It's working.
I have so many lenses. It depends on which part of the day I'm in, which lens I'm using. An hour ago, the lens I was seeing things through was as a an older person seeing science through a third grader's eyes. The magic of seeing a science experiment for the first time.
Yeah, cool.
That may sound kind of strange, but it just depends on where I'm at, what lens I'm seeing things through.
Yeah. Okay, somebody else?
Who wants to speak?
I think a lens that I share that not everyone always knows is that of a mentor, of like working with young people. I do youth ministry. I work with young people in various settings. I've coached basketball for 15 years for high school boys. So that's something that people don't often know. But that experience brings a certain lens through those experiences that I have been able to share with those young people and their families, their extended families that I work with. So that's something that I always apply as well.
Thank you. Someone else ready?
I'll jump in. As you can imagine, I think you can guess what I'm going to say, but I see everything through the lens of a superintendent now. And I think everyone in the district should get a chance to do it for at least a few days or a week until you are, and I say this a lot, until you are in this seat, you really don't get that 360 view of everything that happens in the district and all of the moving pieces. It's a very, very interesting view, and I have no respect for all the superintendents out there. And even to the idea of having to worry that it's going to be very cold on Monday, things like that in other roles, it was somebody else's decision. And that weight at times of having to make the decision. It's an interesting view.
Thank you. Wanda, are you ready? I felt like I saw your brain churning too.
Yeah, I right now I've always been an advocate of cultural pluralism, that I never wanted, at least the way my parents and my family tried to educate all of us about not being ethnocentric, that all cultures are important, all people are important, that I think we have, in lieu of way our society is going now, and you look at what's going on, I think you have to continually fight to make sure people understand that all cultures are important and people have something to offer and something to give. And right now, equity is something, has always been important to me. And it's something I've always worked at to strive to see. And I think we have to do that, because that's why we're having the problems we're having now. It's just reading a lot of books and it's the same old thing. We can't get beyond certain points. So how do we get beyond that? So just trying to understand that.
So, a new area that I am studying now related to that is how to apply an equity lens to data, which I used to think those things would have been mutually exclusive. Data is data is data. And I'm realizing that we bring our cultural lenses to the way we see data. And so that's a whole new area of exploring, which is very related to what we're going to talk about with goal setting tonight, is in terms of how you view it. So as you say that, I think about how it is an ongoing journey to keep learning and to keep that lens on. Okay, someone else want to share? Okay, it looks
All board
like
members.
Valdenia is joining us. Good afternoon. Busy lady here. So just really quickly, Valdenia, would you like to tell us a lens that you're using today, that you're looking through the world today, just one of them?
I'll just say an educator who's a legislator.
Okay, I was expecting something related to legislator. All right, anyone else? Okay, so I'm gonna take us on and move on for right now. And this thing that I show you all the time, but this is so related to this goal development. So just this reminder of the governance clock, you know, and so the board's role versus the superintendent's role, and that establishing the vision. So, you know, as a board adopting the policy, and then it moves into the superintendent's realm of, you know, developing the plans and implementing them and monitoring them. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about what you as a board need to see then to evaluate those results. So, you know, what is it that you want? But then how do you know if you're getting the results that you want? And so just, you know, as a review, the board's determining what it is that they want and why they want it. And so that's where maybe some of those lenses come in. Why we want this vision may be because we want to increase equity with it throughout our system, for example. Okay, that may be the why for something that you have. And then, of course, then in the superintendent's role is then, well, how they're going to recommend how they help you achieve that what. And then and when I say superintendent, you understand, I don't mean just her singly all by herself. I mean with staff. And then suggest why they think that's the way to get what you want to get. Okay. So, and this is a review again, as we look at the key work of a Board of Education, centering everything around student achievement, but starting with that piece of what is it that you want to see, and knowing that accountability has to be built in to make sure that that happens, and that boards of education, you know, begin the work of making it happen through their policy development, then their leadership within the community, and then those relationships that are built. And so as we start to look at how goals help you communicate the vision that you want to accomplish. Whoops, that went a little too fast. So this is, of course, from the Kansas State Department. I popped this up for a little while last time in terms of the State Board of Education. And as we look at what the state of Kansas vision is, saying that a high school graduate, you know, is academically prepared, cognitively in terms of knowing how to learn and how to continue to learn as a lifelong learner, has technical skills, and then some of, you know, we used to call these a little bit of soft skills, but some of that's also within executive function, like showing up at work on time, meeting deadlines, those kinds of things. And then civic engagement. And some of this is how to make sure your voice is heard. So are we teaching kids how to make their voice heard in a way that it can cause change in action, okay, as part of that. And so what the state board has said is that local boards then, as they look at those social and emotional factors, they'll determine how to measure those. kindergarten readiness, and then as we're looking at personalized learning, individual plans of study, graduation rates, and and measuring post-secondary success. So I'm not going to go into this, but the next step down in terms of how we're doing this would be using evidence-based practices, and they call them the 4 R's, but it's the relationships, the relevance, a responsive culture, and rigor. So as we look at the system, as you're determining what these goals will be, and this is stuff I have shared with you before, I'm just building the context here, is we talk about these 4 areas, but that these are supported by communication, and I don't have the word written here, but communication and culture, okay? That we have to have those in place for this to happen. So one of the things as we talk about these issues today is as we weigh particular ideas on 2 scales, as we look at something as a goal, what is its importance? As we're thinking about what our big vision is, and being aligned with the State Board of Ed's vision. And then where do we think we are in that right now? Because many of the things you'll talk about, it's not going to be some brand new inspiration that somebody was struck by lightning and all of a sudden they've thought of, this is what we need to do to be successful. Almost everything we come up with is building on, or getting better at. Now, occasionally there'll be new things, but many of the things as you're looking at that will be continuations. So kind of thinking about, is this something we did a great job for a while and kind of dropped off our radar? Or, so I'm not going to pop this up again, but as we're talking, I'm going to say, where do you think you would rank that as on the importance scale? Okay. And then on the progress scale. Okay. So what I want to just show you here is just a sample of, looking at what might be your long-term areas of focus. So where do you want to be, 3 to 5 years from now? And then within that, what needs to be addressed within the next 2 years? So here's just an example. Took a real school district and changed the name of it to Happyville. But, I'm sorry. The long-term area of focus on this one was in the area of communication. And a short-term piece of theirs was improving staff morale, okay? So this is just to kind of give you an idea of then how it would be broken down into steps. Now, I didn't pull out my firehouse again, but what we want to remember is that many of those things as you're getting into action steps that's what you're directing the superintendent to do with her staff. And you want to be very careful not to get too much into the how, because remember yours is the what. And so you want the superintendent and her staff to make recommendations to you on how they think that you can get there. So as we're moving into these 4 areas, and what you'll see here is I've plugged in our, the ideas and things that you raised last time, but putting them in these broader categories. So as we think of that quadrant of students, And once again, these are things I showed you before. Do your students have experiences that are challenging and preparing them? Do they have opportunities that are aligned to their personal interest? Are they, relevant? Are they engaging? And are they building meaningful relationships with staff? This kind of gets into the social emotional a little bit. Okay, when we're looking at some notes that I pulled from our conversation last time that would be related to that quadrant, some of the things that you all suggested were related to post-secondary success. So we had some conversation about the Diploma Plus program. Okay, we talked about graduation rate. So one of the things I'll throw out here is increasing your graduation rate, is it a vision and a goal, or is it a data point for something bigger? Okay. And then I've got to be careful not to try to point too much. And then with ACT again, is it the outcome that we want to raise ACT scores, or is that a data point that helps us see if we're achieving something else that we want? When we look at student achievement per grade level, is our third grade achievement data, are those the outcome we're seeking, or is third grade achievement data information that helps us monitor I did not push that button that time. That was some sort of tech goblin. Is that something that helps us see where we are in a bigger goal? And then last time, if you may recall, what happened here? I'm frozen now. Okay, what it said before it froze was, the way it was phrased last time is you said, we don't know what we don't know. Okay, do you remember that when you were having that conversation? So what I tried to do is, so let's take that question. What do we know we know? And that might be the place where we start to figure out what we don't know, but we're never going to know completely what we don't know. Okay, I know I'm talking like I'm in some university philosophy class, but so let me just raise a couple of questions right now before I move on to the next quadrant. What thoughts do you have as you look at some of these in terms of what you're thinking are outcomes that you want to achieve? And Diploma Plus was a very specific example of how you might be able to achieve post-secondary success. So I thought it was it worked really well to show how you as a board might, identify where you want to go. So what other thoughts do you have? Let me put you back on gallery so I can see all of you. What are your thoughts as you're thinking about, remember, it's that quadrant of 4 things. This is just the first quadrant, supported by culture and communication. So we'll talk about that too, but within the student section.
When I look at what you put up and the way you said it, I see it being both, because I think the dilemma, and we have to deal with the Kansas legislature. They're looking at graduation rate, ACT, test scores, and I'm not saying scores are everything, but we have to be honest and realistic. They're looking at that because that's how they determine the monies, and they continually bring up that we're not where we should be.
Okay.
And I mean, that's a fact. We're not. And we're striving to get better. People are working, but we do have to be honest and realize they use this data. And if we can show success through Diploma Plus, our graduation rate, these are things that you got to have some numbers. We can't pretend that they don't use that. They do. In the business world, a legislator. So we have to use that. I think we have to do both. You were kind of going back and forth, but we got to do both because we got to be able to show taxpayers, our legislators, because that's who they're basing the money, how they appropriate it, what works, what doesn't work, and they're killing us with it. And we're making strides, but we got to do better.
Other thoughts?
I just want to make sure, can you repeat your question? I don't want to tell you what I think because I'll probably mess it up. Can you repeat your question?
So it really just is, as you look at those things and you kind of think about, what's our big picture outcome versus which of those things are part of that big picture outcome versus steps along the way. And so, as Wanda has responded, in some ways, and Wanda, if I'm not accurately paraphrasing you, correct me, but in some ways, you're not given a choice about whether, for example, you're going to view ACT scores as a short-term goal to help you meet a bigger goal because the state of Kansas is really looking at that data and you're held accountable for ACT scores, for example. Wanda, did I represent what you said accurately enough? And so part of what I think is really important is really trying to figure out what is the big piece related to students that we know we want to accomplish. And then you can build in like those short, like your 3-year goals related perhaps to ACT scores with maybe then your 5-year goal, something that, so I'm just throwing out an example that an ACT score might be a data point 4 might be, a longer term goal.
I wanted to make sure I completely understood your question before I started. So one thing that comes to mind for me, and where it fits, I don't know, but it's just equality in our education system. And so just because I do have students that are in the district and I have a little bit more insight when it comes to that, and I'm not knocking any of our schools, so please know that I'm not knocking any of our schools, but sometimes it doesn't feel like our students are getting equal education. It depends on what school they attend, determines what type of education they get and what opportunities they have from there. And even from there, the curriculum sometimes feeling a little bit more rigid in some schools versus others. So to me, it's equality in the same opportunities.
Okay, so different. One thought is that there may be different opportunities based on the school that you attend within USD 500. Is that accurate? Okay.
Yep, and some people may not like that comment. I'll speak more for even our audience, and I'm picking more on even our high school. So of course we know we have one school that's different than others. And so I know that may not change, but I struggle with, if you go here, you get this, but if you go to these other schools, you get this.
Thoughts?
I guess I see it a little differently because I think as a board, it's up to us to ensure that even playing field. Just like when I first came on the board, AP was not offered at the other schools. Now it is. College and career technical school wasn't offered to Sumner students. Now they can go. My daughter doesn't go to Sumner, but she's taking the ACT in the 11th grade, just like the others. She started going and taking college classes in the 10th grade. So, and she doesn't, so I think, What I see is that now that we've shifted a lot under how we have recommended to the superintendent, our vision and goals, it's been more alignment that has taken place over the past couple of years than ever before. You know, there were many programs and classes that we had questions about and saying, well, why is it that full geometry or full math is not offered? And now that we've had different alignment and staff have been rearranged, we're getting that. And so I agree that when we look at what determines success, we have to balance that between what the state wants, what the national government requires. Just like with SPED, for instance, there was no modifications that we could do with SPED, you know? And so we got a number of complaints from our community asking, why is SPED still having to meet in person and all of this, and what are we doing about students? And I think the key in determining success is all of this looped together with knowing that we are not going to be perfect in every area, but the goal is to ensure that the vision of the board aligns with the vision, the superintendent, and they're doing what is needed to make this success happen. Because we can have, we just saw that we graduated 41 students in December who wanted to graduate early. So that's going to help our graduation rates. And when we look at this, one of my questions was, how does it relate to our Diploma Plus that is very beneficial? And the feedback I received was students weren't interested in going to college, although the district paid for it, but they're going because they want to work. And so how do we help impress upon students that technical school and college courses would give them a leg up rather than just graduating? And so I think the goal would be is, what do we do now? We continue to ensure that parents know the importance of Diploma Plus and that students know the importance. But we know in higher education that students also leave their first and second year of school because they have that guilt to go back home to provide income for their family.
So you've given us a really good example of how it comes down the chain, for example. So if you determine that the goal is that USD 500 students will understand the value of career and technical education, so which could mean college courses or could mean, you know, certification or some sort of technical skills. Okay, so if that's the big vision, that they understand the value as a goal, then you mentioned a number of things then that could be shorter term goals to help achieve that. So one might be increased communication to parents and families in our district to help them understand. And you mentioned several and they just ran away out of my brain, but that was one of them. But I mean, how it goes to support that bigger goal. Maxine, you were saying something?
She mentioned to prioritize what we need to do.
Okay, and so that actually ends up being a really good example then of, then we go to Dr. Miguel and say, Dr. Miguel, can you make some recommendations to the board on how our staff can help our students prioritize, and then, you know, like her counseling staff would meet and talk, and, you know, that they would come together and come with strategies. And so then, like, if we want to help parents better understand, then that might be a different department that she would delegate that to make some recommendations for how we can better work with our parent community to understand the importance. And then within that direction to them, then how will we know if it's working? So then what would be the kind of data? So one I would throw out is you might see increased enrollment in Diploma Plus. That might be a data point to show you that some of those efforts are working. But what I don't want to move away from then that was said is this issue of equality within the district. Can you talk to me about, as you look at career and technical education and then equality within the system, can somebody help? I have ideas on how they tie together, but I want to make sure they're what you're thinking.
I want to clarify something because I hear you say big picture. And so I understand the steps that have been made. And I understand also we wear a different hat when we're on the board. So we're a little closer to the steps that have been made and how progressively we're going in the right direction. But when I hear big picture, I hear let's talk about the big picture. And so when I have a student that if they attend one school, they get notified if their GPA is low. But if you attend another school, parents are never notified. When I'm thinking big picture, that's equality to me. Students should not be in shock when they move from one school to another school right here in our district and their GPA drops so low and then there's the threat of, oh, I may get put out, I may not. That's where I'm thinking about equality and bigger picture.
Okay, so one of the directions could be then, how do we make sure that all students are presented with these opportunities, not just in a communication, we're gonna like advertise and do marketing, but the things that matter, that if it's too late, you can't qualify. So what are the recommendations to make sure students are tracking and know what their grade point average is, or what classes, you know, what their what classes they still would need to have if that's what they're going to enroll in when they're a junior, or so that could be once again then. So that addresses the issue of equality within this career and technical ed. Are there other ways that you're seeing that these pieces fit together?
We need to have consistency from high school to high school with the same type of communication between parent and teachers. Between when you enroll for classes, it's consistent from high school to high school because we do have a lot of mobility in our district. So when the enrollment process at Washington should be maybe not exactly the same as the enrollment process at Sumner or Harmon, but similar, so that it's not a totally different system, so that parents can say, oh yeah, that's what their cousin Johnny is doing, how he's enrolling, so that they can see that this is the process that you do, that these are the classes that you can sign up for, so that it's consistent. Like when the student at Washington's grades drop like to this point or what level, the parents get notified just like the parents at Harmon's kids get notified. It doesn't fall through the cracks just because they're not in the same classes and stuff. There's a lot of different silos working, and we need to become consistent. It's easier in a district when you have just one high school, but we're a district with 5 high schools, so we need to get more consistency. That's what I keep hearing from parents. They want to know, it doesn't matter which high school they go to, it's going to be the same with a little deviation, but they can feel comfortable knowing they understand
of what they can enroll in, and that they're going to have communicated and advised in the same way, no matter what high school they're in.
So they understand the process, They don't have to learn a totally new system when they go from school to school.
Okay. Other thoughts related then to students and kind of this?
So I'll just share real quick, and mine might be a little more abstract, and I may not be answering your question directly. So pull me back in if you need to. But when I look at these, or in part of the conversation, what I hear as well is, our superintendent and staff are going to do the what, right? The nitty gritty, put the details in, like look at, this is the measurements. Our job as a board, at least, and I could be wrong, so correct me if I am, is what policies are we putting in place to help support, to make sure that all of our students have that access to that quality education, those to meet those metrics that we're looking for, right? So looking.
So policy is one of the mechanisms that as a board you have to do that.
Right. So looking at the policies to ensure that, because I think we all acknowledge, and I, to Ms. Page's point earlier, right, there are issues within our education system that are inequitable and unjust. And so looking at our policies to make sure that we are changing and fixing some of those things to align, to build a better equitable educational system. The other piece that I look at is around our budget. So where are we investing our resources, our dollars, to ensure that our students have equitable access to that Diploma Plus and that college access, or whatever it is, right? So those are the two things that we as a board can control, are our policies and our budget, and where we're investing our resources. And then the third thing I would just throw in there as well is understanding the difference, again, between equitable versus equal as well, right?
Yes.
So there is a difference there. So that's kind of what came to mind, and how we can address some of these systemic issues that might be inhibiting our students when we're looking at graduation rates or achievement, and things that we as a board, I think, have control over. So anyways, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Well, so I was going to take one thing you said and just twist it a little bit. So as you look at your board functions in the way that you cause your vision to be realized. So one is through policy, okay? Two is through budget approval and allocation of resources. So you mentioned those two. What I kind of heard you infer, but not exactly say, and one is through directives to the superintendent and essentially the evaluation process. So as you think about specific functions of the Board of Education, and so that's where then you make a directive. And once again, when I say superintendent, I don't mean literally just her, I mean the team. And so as you get into, what you were kind of saying at the end, it's really through those functions that you make that happen. So then as you look at that issue of equity and equality, those of you that know me know there was no way I was going to just let us go through this without getting back into that. But I thought, as that was raised, clearly what I'm hearing from you is there's some issues of equity, but what I'm hearing you say is there's some real issues of equality as well, in that if there's a course offering at high school A and you cannot enroll in that course for whatever reason, maybe the way the schedule is or it's not offered or whatever, that actually becomes more of an equality issue that needs to be addressed before then you can start to examine the issues of equity. And so when you're talking about policy, then I think you have to go back and do that equity lens to say, how does this policy impact people in different ways? And that's then where there may be some issues of equity where a policy might need to be written differently. And Valdenia, I know you've done lots of work in this area, so will you piggyback on that, other thoughts?
Right now, I'm just absorbing everything, but just very interesting that it. I'll say thank you, Ms. Clark, for bringing the point up. I don't believe we have had this conversation. So we've had it in different ways. I think scheduling. I think Ms. Humphreys has mentioned stuff about consistency a lot, and I mentioned things about, is one class at one school the same at another school? Or if I get a C average here, it's the same thing as I get a C average here. So we've had bits and pieces of this conversation. So it's right now, it's interesting. I'm listening and figuring out what direction I want to go.
Okay.
And I do want to clarify and say, I'm speaking from my experience and where I've been. So some board members have been here longer, and it may not be, the depth may not be as large as I think it is, or the gap may not be as large as how I feel it is. But
No, I agree with you 100%. Probably, I just talk about more things, but no, I agree with you 100%. It is something that we have had to address, and we have not. So
the question I would ask next is, then how will you know? How can you measure what information would tell you if what your perception is through the lens that you're bringing today and the lens you bring to the Board of Education? How can you verify and know?
I think that goes back to what Randy said earlier, is how do you side by side those policies and procedures? And so at that point, we definitely need our staff to say, this is what we do at this school, this is what we do at this school, how do they compare?
But then what Ms. Page said, you just don't know how often KCK's achievement is spotlighted and not in a positive manner. So it's how would you know one component is, like it or not, student achievement on these state assessments?
Right. So if you can think of those as benchmarks, you could still have like the big outcome you want, but you've got to achieve the benchmarks. Now, where you run into a challenge is if you don't believe those benchmarks of ACT scores really relate to post-secondary, then you might be having to do something because it's legislated, and I don't mean legislative in the correct.
Right. I mean, we all know that the tests are culturally biased. End of story. From day one, not going to change. But that colleges use ACT, SAT, graduation rank. These are data points that seriously are problematical, but society uses them. So, I can complain about the bias, but I better score, 800.
Yeah, so you can make your voice heard if you have a score of 800. So to tell people. But that goes back to Wanda's point that we don't really have a choice not to address those. But how can we make it fit in our system so that it's not handicapping us from achieving what we want to achieve? Can we build that in?
We can, but what always bothered me, I retired in 2012. We stopped maybe 15 or 16 years, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but we used to show the scores. We have to own up to it no matter what it is, because that should be a bar that we should work toward to improve. We stopped printing the scores. Now I know it was marginal growth. And then we got to figure out, well, what can we do? How can we make it better? But you do have to own up to it. You cannot show it. And then everybody can't believe, what is that bad? Well, you stopped printing the scores. You didn't tell people. I'm not saying we're saying it, but we need to make it public. And sometimes making it public, it's not a good feeling. But we got to be able to show what we're trying to do, how we've grown. We started teaching to the standards. Now, say what you will about Faust, but I got to give him credit for that because we weren't. So there's some things we weren't doing that we begin to do. We've seen some growth. No, it's not astronomical, but it's a start. But we got to keep showing what we're trying to do, show what we've done, and be honest about it, and not be naive and pretend like it's not happening. Because other people are showing the data. Go to the state legislature; they're having a party with it.
So one of your shorter term goals could be, still with this big picture, is to increase transparency.
Yeah.
Because as a board, so I'm going to suggest this might be what you believe as a board. As a board, we believe an important step to in increasing achievement on the way to post-secondary success is to have transparency so that our families and our community can see the progress that we make or when we aren't making progress, so that everyone knows where we are. I mean, you could build a lot of rationale for why transparency is going to help you improve more than hiding it. Stacy?
We were publishing scores of the levels when we had the reports of where each school was. All of that was published on our website and broken down, and where we were per grade. We had the schools listed who were on probation. You know, half of the schools were on probation. That was on the website. I know I reshared them on my website. So I guess I would need clarification as to which ones, because with the ACT, remember Dr. Faust even created a ceremony for acknowledging the ACTs and published them and showing them around. And I'm not sure if we're going to do that again this year, but I think maybe direction would need to be like, where should they be published? Because like I said, I remember them on my site sharing, sharing the data that the school provided, along with how our grades were doing, which schools were failing, the rankings. And also there was a report out, remember, about the, what's the name of the IP exams, of how many students that we were paying for Sumner to take them, and only like 3 to 5 were passing. And then once Dr. Faust came here, we had about 100 students. So we jumped from 5 to 30. So I think it's, where do we want that information published? How do we want it published? And then last year, of course, because of the pandemic, they didn't have to take the assessments. So, I think it's just how much data do we want published and where? Because that will be important.
And you said it first, Stacy. So that's something that you say to Dr. Miguel. Will you have your team put together recommendations on how we can increase transparency about how our students are achieving? So instead of you as a board saying, we want this published this way and this here, direct your administrative team to make some recommendations, knowing that the big goal is to increase transparency. And then your professional staff can then be sensitive to where is this more likely to hurt morale as opposed to increase transparency. Where would you get diminishing results, and where does it help work as a catalyst to keep us moving forward? And so one of the things that you might promote is, how do we continue to develop a growth mindset that when we're not achieving where we are yet, we're saying yet. The emphasis is we're not there yet, which has a very different feeling to me as an educator than if I'm just told I'm not stacking up. It's, well, you haven't gotten there yet. What do we need to do? And so some of that is in the culture part.
And also, I would say, just like how can we ensure that we spotlight achievement? The spelling bee is tomorrow. There are 15 schools. How can we shine a light on those students who are participating in the spelling bee that we're sponsoring? Does the community know about, our awesome students who will be participating? So I think that goes along with how can we continue, like you mentioned, have that growth mindset to spotlight things that are happening positive in our district, because I'm not quite sure if the general parent knows or the general community knows about the spelling bee and how many students have made it to that level.
Yeah. So once again, then in asking then your superintendent and administrative team, what other areas should we be spotlighting to show, where we have excellence and where kids are doing well,
The one thing I don't think we utilize enough, we got the television station, and then we also need to keep in mind, everybody doesn't have internet. Everybody doesn't have cable, Wi-Fi, because they're not giving it away free.
Yeah.
And because I'm being realistic, because I struggle to pay.
So yeah, I have that.
Man's venture. So let's be more creative in the way that we present the information and use every medium possible. But you got that media center that we don't use, I think, my opinion, to our fullest.
Okay, so when I'm going to come to a slide with that, but I did not put the TV station on it. So
yeah, you show the spelling bee winners, who the participants are and who's doing this and who. I mean, let's spotlight the kids. I'm not, again, if they don't have internet, they won't be able to see it. So what's another medium? There's too many mediums out here that we tend to only use one or two. And you got a prime example with getting the shots. If I'm a senior citizen, I don't know how to use that or go online and do this. I can use my telephone, but then you throw me another curve when I got to answer all these prompts. So you got to consider the clientele. Who are you working with? What do they have? We seem to go with the majority and aim down the middle. That's not fair. And we're still talking about equity. So how do we get that?
Yeah. Okay. So I think that we're coming up with the questions of the information that you want to ask for from your staff, so to move forward. So if I move us to educational programming again, and so Wanda, this gets into that a little bit during a pandemic when we're thinking about issues of access. And so that's looking at that other quadrant of the educational program. How do we make sure that we're influencing and developing programming that can meet the needs of our students based on what they have, and how can we help them, where they don't have the resources that have been developed. What needs to change? The way we're doing the programming, or is it in finding ways to get resources to kids? So I wanted to use the first quadrant of students really as a way to kind of show this process. So I'm not going to go into these as much, and then we'll come back. But the third quadrant of students, okay, sorry, not students. Staff, are the strategies that are being used, are they engaging students? And you already started addressing this when we were talking about students. Is there quality instruction, not just across curricular areas, but across attendance centers? It's a little different than what you raised, but it might, because I heard somebody say there might be somebody that doesn't teach something in a different school. Is it available in all school, and our expectations the same? And then as you think about this need with staff, this was what you raised last time. You said something about, as a board, we have a passion for student achievement. So I want to extend that question and say, do you believe you have a staff that has a passion for student achievement? And as you're thinking about goals, because we talked last time a little bit about issues of recruiting and hiring, how do we make sure that we do that? And then, are we across all staff areas keeping students at the center? So as a board, you talked about that as a strength of the board. So how do we make sure these two strengths of the board are represented in our staff, our personnel? Okay. And then this is the area that you have not talked about. So like I went through all of our notes of everything we've talked about, and I don't really hear people mentioning that the issues or the problems are related to physical plant. Is that because I haven't put the right questions up? Or is it because it's just so much lower than other needs? Or is it not a need at all? But I have nothing in my notes from you that talks about physical plant at all.
It's important. And I give the example. When I taught, I always felt that the schools further out had more supplies and things that we did. We would go to our social studies meeting and they had technology and things that we didn't get. They would say, we're going to get it. And we never got it. So I don't know if there's equity there now. And do they have these things?
Okay. Somebody else was starting to talk.
It's definitely something that we need to revisit. Before we passed the bond in 2016, there was a study done of all of our buildings. Randy was on the bond committee too. And there was a very in-depth study done of all of our buildings and quite a few recommendations done. And the committee actually recommended, I believe it was over 500 million, wasn't it, Randy? In upgrades that we needed to do in our facilities. And we went with the $235 million bond. Because
like
we could,
half of the recommendations is out.
There was quite a few schools that needed a lot of work done on them, a lot of upgrades and replacements. But we went with the board went with the figure that would work with no tax increase. And we just finished that bond this year. I think there's a few more smaller projects to finish up this summer. But I think the bond committee is something that will have to be put back together again. The community committee that was on that, because there was supposed to be hopefully a second bond issue coming forward after the first one was done. But Central Middle School, where Wanda taught, was one of the buildings that was mentioned that needed to be replaced.
The whole building needed to be replaced.
Yeah, the whole building, yes. It's the very old building, many different floors, additions, and Wanda could tell you all about that.
But
at the time, it got put on the schedule as one to look at later on. But we're an old district with old buildings, and we've always taken very good care of our buildings. In fact, the architects and the engineers that went through our buildings were very, very impressed with the maintenance and upkeep that we had done on our buildings. But we're an older school district, and we need to provide our children with modern day facilities, our children and our staff. So I know we may not have talked about it yet, but that's a conversation that we will be having in the next few years.
So is there a goal defined already related to that? No.
No, because we've been dealing with the pandemic. Everything
Yeah.
kind of went on hold.
Yeah.
It's not saying it's not important, but right now, trying to keep everybody safe mode.
Yeah, getting our kids back into the buildings has kind of been the top of the pile, but I'm shocked. I for one, I know that is in the back of my mind, but you deal with one crisis at a time.
I can give you somewhat a different example. We remodeled all the swimming pools at the schools. And during the summer, a lot of our children of color have no place to swim. High rate of drowning. So I threw out one of those, during the budgetary planning session that, hey, we open the swimming pools during the summer. We kind of reward our summer school students. We teach swimming. And the pushback was, we can't find lifeguards. So to me, again, there was no interest in this. It may be abstract, but it is strictly a community need for the children of our district. But if the folks don't have the will, then it goes nowhere.
Okay, so was that conversation held like within the board in a broader setting?
It was doing the budgetary planning. It was a couple of years ago.
Okay.
But the acceptance was like, oh, that's too far-fetched. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. Summer swimming, that's what kids do. You can't maybe go to the Y. You don't go to the Turner Rec or the Bonner pool. There's a 10th Street pool, but that's it. So, again, we don't think big. Go ahead.
No, I was just making a comment. That 10th Street pool needs some work. So it won't serve our community at all. So you're absolutely right. The other thing I was just going to throw in there, because we're in a pandemic, right? Rethinking our physical plan. So now that we've, social distancing and spacing, and how does that affect the type of physical space that we need moving forward, right? Who knows what's going to come with these variants and COVID or whatever future pandemics we might see. But how does that change any plans we might have for our buildings or the new buildings that we just opened? Impact those buildings as well. So I think that's something that we need to have a conversation and think about as well, because that's parents, staff are going to be asking, how are you keeping us safe in a classroom that where we have 30 students, but it's not large enough, or in a cafeteria. So I think those are things that we need to think about as well, moving forward.
I agree with. Go ahead, Janie.
And that's true, Randy. We can't really go from the survey and the research that they did from the 2016 bond. Before we go farther, we're going to have to look at the new upgrades they are recommending for air handling systems for buildings now. It's not the same. They've done so much research over the last year. They recommend different air handling systems, and that's going to it's going to make a difference on any future building projects or what remodels and things that we may have to do.
Plus, we've learned so much from virtual.
Yes.
And how do we reimagine what education looks like in the classroom and beyond? And so the typical classroom that we knew even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, may not be the best. And I don't know, right? Just things that we consider and think about as we move forward.
And those are the things that I agree we should be looking at as a board. We've made it through the fire. COVID is here. We know it's here, but like, how do we start elevating our thinking from there? That's exactly what I've thought about too, is what does education look like in the future? And I don't know that we've talked about that as a board, or what do we want to look like in 21, 22 with what we've learned.
And I think too is even if we look at it, what constraints will it be? Because I would love to see virtual school be a part of reality, that students have that as a viable option to continue online virtually, no matter when COVID is over. For parents to have that option of being able to stay at home with their children, or children who choose to stay at home to avoid some of those social awkward areas. Because when we think about bullying and the impact of that, and many students who just want to learn, just want to go to school and learn, but are not due to various situations that may be going on at their school, I would love to see us continue to think about, is there a way for us to make that a viable option? Kansas does have a curriculum that allows for online learning for students. How could we possibly incorporate that into what we do to make it part of the curriculum? Or how can we make it more efficient to where we're just able to serve our students where they are for all families, than having to go into a physical building?
And I'll add on to Dr. Yeager's comment. I've thought about even hybrid. So for those students that say, I would like to go to school 2 to 3 days a week for the social aspect of it, but those other 2 or 3 days, what does that look like? So just an overall process, what does that look like?
And there are some of our students that are thriving with virtual learning, but there are some that are not. So that's where we need to look and see what we can offer our kids. But the majority of our children want to be back in the building. They do much better in the social world of school. And, I can't wait to get them back in, but we need to have the option for the kids that do thrive with self-directed learning.
Now, what do we do with our old buildings?
That's a conversation that we need to have with some of our old buildings, yes.
And some of the old buildings are filled with asbestos. They got some problems. They need to be torn down. Because I worked in one, and I know at least, I don't have the back it up, but we lost 12 people to cancer. And they pretty much got it once they got in the building.
So was asbestos containment or abatement or removal part of that the bigger $500 million recommendations, or?
No, it probably wasn't.
Okay.
But I would say too is that we do have a number of new schools, and Fairfax is one that I continue to be an advocate for, need to move or have a different location. And but this all with, as we talk about these things, I also consider how can we streamline this to recommend it to the new superintendent who's coming on board, that will be tasked with additional things for the upcoming school year. So what would be the best method to streamline some of the things that we're talking about to help, with Dr. Miguel and the new superintendent know the of what we're seeing needs to be done with the short and long.
So if it's of any help, I'm taking notes. So I'm sure there's going to be a transition process. So, but just a tiny bit of good news to share as you're having this conversation about virtual school and what we need to offer and what we don't have. We had that exact conversation today with staff. And this is the second Friday in a row that we're talking about this. So we are going to bring some actions to the board. So it's nice to see that we are really aligned in our thinking.
Okay, so part of where we're going with this is we're going to try to find out what's the big picture up here, and then what are the shorter term goals, that have to be achieved to get to that big thing, and what are some of the data points, kind of going back to this idea of the ACT, that also have to be included within those, either because it is a data point that informs us on how we're doing, or it's something that because of some other reason we're required to maintain it, the state or whatever. Okay.
Well, you use that data as a selling point for your district. They asked a question at the town meeting, and it blew my mind. Mr. Guerrero asked, well, for a new person that you might be trying to recruit to come to your district, what are some positive things? And there were only 2 things mentioned. So we got to do a better job of saying what do we do well? Yeah. When we struggle, they asked the community. Maybe they didn't know. I don't know. But somehow we got to get the word out. We have some good things we're doing, and then we have things we got to improve on. But we ought to be able to say that we do this well. We do this. There were only 2 comments. Now, I don't know if it's just our society and how we're geared, but they could tell you all the wrong.
Yeah.
But what are some things that we're doing? And we are doing some good things.
Yeah.
And maybe we don't sell it enough.
And so once again, Wanda segues me to the next step, I think, second time. And here you go. How do we share progress obtained? How do you get the word out? How do you make sure that you have communication from all stakeholders? And so let me just pop up. So things that you guys talked about last time as factors to consider. You talked about having town halls, a lot of people using email, Facebook as a mechanism. Now, once again, these 2 things are dependent on people having internet access. Another barrier and opportunity is that you have 70 languages within the district. So how do you build on that? And where it's a barrier, how do you look at that? You talked about home visits that do occur. So part of the question I would ask is, what's the consistency of that when it's effective? But as you look at having a goal then that's related to communication and culture, the 2 things that I've been hearing you say related to that are, we have to find more creative ways to communicate. So that's the how do we communicate. But what I also hear you saying throughout all 5 of these areas is there are other things we need to be communicating. Like we need to do a lot. I heard you talk about transparency when maybe you're not achieving where you want to, but also spotlighting and highlighting the high points, the things that are going well. what the spelling bee was mentioned. What other kinds of achievement can be highlighted? I'm sure there are things in the arts and music, you know, and that's the question. How do we know if we are highlighting achievement in those areas? And what kind of information would help us know if the word's getting out? And then as we look at these kinds of issues, are we doing it in a way that gets to everyone? So,
and Marcia, I think we need to take a step back in all of those areas and make the pledge to be honest. That if the community person says, you know, how many languages, just looking at your thing there, don't say 2, be honest. And I'll give you a very good example. I was at a Chamber of Commerce meeting 3 or 4 years ago. Individual asked about test scores. I was honest. I said I was appalled. I came back to the board meeting, not, as I say, 3 or 4 years ago. The other board members had a hissy fit because it was like, why did you tell the truth? And I'm thinking, you guys are crazy as crazy. Because if we can't tell the truth, because we had been not telling the truth to the community. So when I chose to tell the truth, it was fireworks. So again, those that were doing good, fine. But if I ask you specifically a question that is, the results are not positive, be honest with the community. You can engage them. You can get help. I've always asked, if we need help, let's ask for help. We don't, you know, we're not doing things well in X category. There are people who are, but if we don't want to be honest with the community, hey, I'm not part of anything of the lies.
So that transparency builds trust. So, and then the flip side of that is, but if there are areas where we have achievement that we're not talking about, so we can be transparent about the negative things and the things we haven't done yet that we're still working on, like, you know, test scores, but also looking for those places where, hey, we should be spotlighting this as well. Because when you tell people the negative things, that builds trust. People see you're not hiding things. So that kind of honesty may bite in the moment, but in the long run, you're building trust with your community and they're going to be more supportive of.
But let's follow it up also, that the board has to be informed honestly, because I could have said our curriculum has not been aligned with standards for 8 years. I didn't know that. You know, we didn't find that out until a couple of years ago. That has explained a lot. So that you know, people on this board talking about trust, but there is not honest communication provided to the board. I'll put it like this. There have been examples where the honest communication has not been provided to the board. I won't say it is currently, I'll just say there have been examples.
But
I'm sorry, Stacy, go ahead.
I would say the importance is it's not current. You know, this is 2021. So when we're looking that honest communication has been provided by the current, it's really discouraging when people are not, do not feel like they can be trusted or believed. Just like when we had almost half of our schools on probation, when our SPED department, we had to pay $900,000 because we were out of compliance. This, since I've been on the board, it has been honest. We have meeting after meeting, executive board after executive board, to know what is going on in the state of our districts. And I think when we talk about the community, that I would agree that many community members have been misled to feeling like this is still the 1950s or 60s when Wyandotte County was really up top and we were all top notch and we were just shooting out doctors and lawyers and teachers or whatever. And that's not been the reality. The reality has been that for the past, except for this most recent year, for the past 15 years, we've been failing our students. So that when we were asking about why don't we have programs to grow our own teachers, why can't Wyandotte County, the #1 place where we're graduating students of diversity, why don't we have teachers coming from us to come back and teach? What is the problem? And I love it that this board that sits here now, that's been here for the past 3 years, have really pushed the button to make sure that we are now turning it back around to where we're saying we want to be represented in our schools. We now have a program that, again, it needs to be tuned a little more of a grow your own program, to where students are graduating, going through, and the hope is that they come back and become teachers here. We just had one last year that talked about how she was able to graduate and come back and be a student teacher and is now looking to teach. And it's like, why wasn't this done before? We don't know, but because we're here as a current board, we're making sure that that happens. And the key is, I believe, is that when we listen to our community, we also help educate them in knowing how these things can happen. We can say we want more diverse teachers, but that's just not going to happen out of the blue. They have to be able to pass standardized tests and be trained on how to take those tests, no matter how biased they may be. We have to prepare them to take tests. And I know one of the things that I've been advocating for, that we've advocated for, is show us the numbers, show us the growth from our fellowship program to our grow your own teachers. Where is the proof that we're actually putting in diverse students from Wyandotte County who's graduating from our schools into those programs? And I'm excited when we do get the report from Dr. Blibble Irving to tell us, or from the HR department about the fellows program, about the percentage of minorities and what we've been doing, not just to advocate for change, but to make sure that it's truly happening in our schools, which again is not celebrated as such, but we are putting in the work as a board to make sure those are happening currently.
Well, I'll just comment as my lens of an educator and a legislator, the policy. And I believe we have the rhetoric, but until you put the equity in the policy, in my opinion, it's only rhetoric.
So 2 things I would follow up then on that is, one, so Stacy, you made a comment that I think is important. Whenever you ask your community a question, you're also communicating information to them. So by the questions you choose to ask, that gives your community a sense of what you care about or what you value based on the questions. So I think then, piggybacking on what Valdenia said, when you're looking at policy, and so you're trying to look at how a policy impacts people differently, as you're asking questions to get that information, you're communicating that that's important to you as a board to try to get that. Now, it's important to follow up and not just stop with that. But I mean, on my paper here, I've written great big that one of the key pieces of all of this is defining the questions to ask. And so as we look at all these big, the big items for the goals, then what questions do we need to ask so that we determine what the shorter term goals are? And in order to get honest information to be able to communicate with transparency, you've got to ask for the information. So I think that's both in, the kinds of data that you want and in the policy review. So as you go back, and we were talking about equality and equity, supporting all of this, you've got to go in and look at your policies and see how different populations are impacted differently too. And so I'm thinking like a funnel, as you go down from the big picture to the smaller ones. So those are the areas, like if we're looking at, 5 significant goal areas. So what I'd like to suggest is that now I take from what I've heard you say and write up suggested goal areas. And in some cases where you've talked about them, then what would be the shorter term goals that would fall under those? And in some cases, you've already identified what questions to ask, but there are going to be holes in that then that need follow up. Like we haven't hit in detail every area. What other information do you need? But I think that 5 significant goal areas have been defined, and as a big surprise to me, I didn't know there'd be so much in the physical plant. But actually you have some real significant subcategories within that too. But does that sound appropriate? I mean, I think as you're looking at having a new superintendent on board, as you're defining the questions to ask, you really then are helping give direction then to your leadership by communicating then the recommendations and the information you need from the staff.
Marsha, you asked the question to us, and I'm going to ask a question back to you, and I may be the only one curious, but I think when you're in the midst of something, sometimes you don't think very clearly about things. Do the subcategories from what you know about our board and where we are at this point, do they align with where we should be focusing our energy? Because I think there has been a lot of time that has been spent in space that maybe it should not have been. And if we're going to move forward, I want to make sure it aligns.
So if we go back to the State Board of Education, see, I think we could see total alignment in these 5 areas because, so I didn't elevate everything that was said, but you also had that conversation about rigor in the middle of that. And that, once again, totally aligns with following from, the State Board. But I think as I think about what you may be talking about, where you've spent a lot of space in some issues that may not look like they align, they're part of those culture and communication though. So, for example, the transparency and trust becomes a very important part of culture and communication to support the student achievement, the work with the staff, the physical plant, and the educational programs. So I guess my short answer is when I write this, there are going to be some holes. I mean, there are some holes because if we process this completely, you guys would never have a weekend. But I think it gives you more targeted areas to go back to where we have the holes.
Can I ask you a question? Or maybe it's not a question. What blows my mind about this, we've never really took the time because we jumped in and, we got on and we've been running ever since. And then we got hit in March. So we need to take the time to plan. Now we're doing this, and I'm not saying it's not important, but when are we going to actually put together some stuff where you can see it? We're saying all this. When do we get to the meat of it?
So that's the steps as I talk about the funnel down. So you start with that long-term goal and then those short-term goals, and that's where those action steps come from then.
Okay, but I get you on that, but I'm just saying, when do we actually set? You've said some things. So when are we going to actually sit down and begin to say, okay, these are our goals? What are when do we line them all up and begin to put the work together so we can see something tangible that I can hold in my hand? And we know these are our policies. This is what we want. And bang, 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 and let's do it. And I know what you're doing. I get it. We're building. We're, scaffolding and doing all that. But I guess I'm just ready. Let's get started.
When's your next board meeting?
Tuesday. But the only problem I'm going to say about that, when you look at the agenda, when we plan, it's so much. And I get this is not a job we get paid to do. This is our civic duty. So how do we work all that time in to do all of this?
So talk a little bit. And so I guess we aren't going to get to the DISC stuff, but this is important. So we talked about agenda setting process. Have you been able to make any adaptations, or are you kind of still in process with that to try to shorten meetings a little bit?
We've done a little bit better. Getting out. We've had a couple at 8 o'clock, and that's come a long way. So that's it's better. We're getting there. 8 o'clock that's something. We're cutting it down, but somehow we got to figure out how do we have some plan time, and without, because some people are still working, some people have families. So you're trying to, how do we work all that out? And you can't do it in a 2-hour meeting. It's going to require some more time. So how do we have these sessions? And I know I get what you're doing, but how do we still incorporate some of that to hit some of this while we're here at this time?
So I would think you would be on target, not for your Tuesday meeting, but your next meeting, to have suggest your big picture goals that have to be in place to be able to vote on those, to see if everyone is on board. So, I'll capture what you said, and that if there, I don't know what you might already have on that agenda for, would that be 1 month from now?
It'd be at the end of the month if you're talking about the next agenda meeting.
Would that agenda allow for adoption of long-term goals?
The 23rd.
I don't know. I mean,
It'd be the 23rd.
It could depend on, if you send those out and reviewing them and having some dialogue about whether we all agree on whether those are goals that we all agree on, right? So whether we need to have a working session on that, or can it be done in a board meeting that may have other items like reentry or whatnot. Yeah. So, I think it's doable. I think as long as but I think if we can have time to discuss and make sure that we're all in agreement in general about some of those long-term goals would be helpful. And I wouldn't want to rush that if that's going to kind of set the course.
No, you don't. And so I think, what could be included within that are suggested, shorter term goals, but I don't think you want to approve those yet. I think you want the big picture. And then, so the other piece that is not in place here would be, and what I think I hear you saying is that you don't necessarily want to do this, but if within those shorter term goals, if you would want to involve community stakeholders before you set those shorter term goals. Now, that certainly is a longer process, but as you also think about the things that you've talked about, is it important before you do your shorter term goals to hear from some of your stakeholders? And I'm not saying one way or another because there's rationale on both sides. I'm just throwing that out there as something to think about.
And I think we've received some input from the community with these town halls that the consulting team conducted. So we have a tidbit of what the community is looking for. So that translates. But, and it, you know, I'm going to put another heavy layer on. We have to start thinking about the budget because we can't wait. Let me just throw this in. House Bill 2067 in essence said, go back to the needs assessments that boards must conduct needs assessment of every attendance center. That's in the statute right now. So that you can't do that overnight.
And how can you define needs if you don't have your big goals in place to know needs against what?
There's a list. There's a list that the Department of Education has that supposedly
which
the district submits.
To the state board. Yeah.
Yeah. So we know what the needs assessment criteria, you know, those to satisfy the roads capacities, blah, 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 blah. But it costs money and we need to start looking at the budget. So put that layer on the goals. I mean, they go together. Again, where your values are is where you put your money.
Right. Yeah. You want budget decisions to be based on these goals. Yeah. Because I mean, once again, as you think about your functions, you know, developing policy, approving the budget, you know, directing the superintendent, those are the ways you realize your vision. You make it happen. So, and I don't want to start the disc with 5 or 10 minutes left of the next steps. But I will send to Leslie. So I'm thinking through my schedule, but by the end of next week, what I've gleaned from you in this conversation in terms of what I think I've heard you say that those goals would be, and then, you know, where there are things that I can plug in underneath from what you've said, so that then you could look at if you want to put that on your next agenda as a discussion item then. Do you want to talk about whether or not, since you already have information from the consulting groups, or do you want other information from stakeholder groups, or are you comfortable that urgency maybe at this point in time outweighs more input? I mean, there's not a right answer to that. Can't always do everything.
So short-term goals are 1 to 2 years, correct?
Would be, 18 months to 2 years. Generally.
Okay, so our short-term goals right now are to get our kids back in schools, to hire a new superintendent, correct? And to get back to normal. Would that be short-term goals?
You can throw out normal because that doesn't exist.
Well,
no, I know what you're saying, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, but
it's normal.
You have to modify it now with whatever will be new normal.
Yeah, the new normal. Would that be short-term goals?
Yeah. I mean, because as you think about it, those are dealing with urgencies right now, and you want to be able to set these goals where you're looking at what's important without, I mean, the urgency never goes away, but it's trying to be able to step back and make sure you get those important pieces in place so that like when you have the urgency of the budget and the needs assessment, you can.
Well, the needs assessment goes with the budget, but those are short-term goals for the next 6 to 18 months.
Yeah, which then, can be aligned then with these longer term goals, which then are aligned with the State Board of Education goals. This is hard work. I mean, and it isn't, if there were just the set of right answers, you would just go open up the vault and pull out the right answers. You've just got to weigh it all and figure out what's best for you right now.
So, okay, so it sounds like you're going to send that information to Leslie by the end of next week, you said, and then she's going to share it with Randy and us to look at our February 23rd meeting. Is that right, Randy? I think I see your head shaking. Yes.
Yeah, that's what I heard anyway.
Okay. And we all agree on that. Are you awake, Valdinia?
Of course.
Okay. Well, you've been in Topeka all week, so I didn't know for sure.
I'm numb from them.
Well, that's what I was afraid of. You might be numb. So, okay. That sounds good to me. Who else? Stacy's there.
Yeah, that sounds good. It's a start. Yeah, we got to start somewhere.
Yeah. And then we can always, who's missing?
I'm fine with that as well.
Okay, I missed a page. There's Yolanda.
The strategic planning part for us should never stop. It should always be going. So this is a start, but it takes a while. If you do it right, then you're going to take a while, and we should just keep building out. We should not be going backwards.
Okay.
So then you could, like, as you continue out, like Yolanda said, then you could in that next set of process bring in stakeholders. So like maybe you can't do that right now, but you could plan for that, as you go forward.
Hey, Marcia, I'm sorry. That Yolanda just said something, and I may have missed it if you already covered it, but that just made me think. Would it be helpful? I know our staff and Dr. Miguel and our staff have been working on our strategic plan at the district. Would it be helpful for you to have that to look at what our staff has been working on and identifying a strategic plan priorities to make sure that our goals as a board are aligned with the work that's internally?
Yeah, which of course you want what you decide to drive that, but they may have done work that will fill in some of those holes where I said we'll have holes.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's always stuff in there that would fill in some of those holes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know they've presented several times to the board already, but I think, just for you to look at that and to look at as you're working on our goals, I think could just be another point to help out.
Dr. Miguel, is that possible to send to me like Monday or Tuesday?
Of course, we can send that. One little caveat that I would want to share is we have identified some misalignments between the district strategic plan and our KISA goals. So right now we're in the middle of aligning both and creating one plan, because I think the fact that there were two different plans that were not completely aligned, and although in some areas they were, but still two plans that at times staff had to look at one or the other. Which one are we really following? Which one are we really living? And if we truly believe that the strategic plan has to be aligned with board priorities and guiding our work, we can't have all these different documents guiding different departments. So we're right now in the middle of doing that. So I'm going to send it to you, Marcia. Just keep in mind that I'm going to send you two documents that will become one and easier for staff to use.
Okay.
And Marcia, can you go back to that state board diagram?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to say, wouldn't all three need to align?
Yes, yes.
Yep.
And certainly like other districts
That
that I'm
one.
working with as well. I mean,
I don't think
challenge for people. Yeah.
I don't think the board keeps that in our focus enough, because we see it and then we don't.
Mhm.
And this, as Dr. Miguel has stated, this is our accreditation process.
Right.
Right.
This drives your KISA. So
And
that's why, like, I put this up first, because as you look at your board goals, if they're aligned with this, then everything should fall in place then if your board goals fit in here. And so then the work they've done with their KISA plan should be able to fall right under.
right. I mean, we just have to pay closer attention, and I don't think we have.
So I don't know in your prior strategic plan, there may be, it's possible there are elements that can't be brought into alignment. And then that's something that, if that's the case, has to be acknowledged, addressed. You know, if
I guess we can only address that after Dr. Miguel's group revises.
Right.
I get year
Right.
1, year 2,
yeah.
year 3, whatever, wherever we
And
are.
I'm just saying that's possible. I don't know that it's the case, but I just know with some other districts I'm working with, they've run into a few little things like that where they started, it sounds like what's happened here, you know, they start down the KISA road and everything hasn't necessarily stayed aligned.
And
Well,
I mean,
we won't know until we see it.
Right.
right, and this whole conversation is so timely because I'm including a KISA report in my Friday update today, so you'll get something.
Because, and this is what we need when I think about the strategic plan, and when they went out to parents and things, they are not aware, and we got to make them aware in terms of accreditation, the state board, what the requirements are, because they want, well, we're not so hung up on the test. You may not be, but let's keep it 100. They are. Our state legislatures, when they start giving that money out and what's going on with vouchers, public schools, we need to wake up and we need to make sure we educate everybody. Because some people know this and some people don't. And some are using it against us. And we're to blame too. We didn't do what we needed to do.
But I think that's like what Yolanda said, then going forward. So you kind of start with where you are in your urgency right now. But as you do future strategic planning work and including your stakeholders, part of that, it's kind of like the questions are also informative. You're educating your community, you know, about those state board requirements as you're getting input from them. And they wouldn't have known before, you know, when you were doing that. So, yeah, I mean, I guess that goes back to the question, we don't know what we don't know. The public doesn't know that they don't know.
And then I think sometimes we need to educate our staff and everybody on this. Everybody needs to know.
Mm-hmm.
This is a vision. I mean, everybody, from the cafeteria lady to the janitor, to the painter, whatever, whomever he is. It used to be that way. We were all on the same page.
So Randy, do you have what you need to be able to insert this in our next, in whatever agenda we've talked about? Like, do you have what you need to go from there?
Yeah, I think so. Sounds like Dr. McGillen has some good notes, and Marcia as well. So we'll follow up once Marcia gets us that information, and then we can plan to get a good conversation at our next meeting. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I just wanted, I mean, it goes back to what Ms. Page just said. We just have to be consistent. So once we start down this path, it can't just be something we trend and then drop.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, and that's like when we talked about agenda setting, then, you know, part of your agenda setting process can be, on each agenda item, you show what it correlates to, which goal it's working toward.
Okay.
So I'm trying to be careful not to shut off conversation. So, you know, when you guys are ready to conclude
Have
this.
this on your slide. Can we get a copy of this?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I could just go ahead and let's say I could have, I'll send that over the weekend. You could send that out just whenever.
I'm sure the state board has those big posters. You
Yeah.
could get us the big posters.
Mhm.
To put in every building.
Yeah.
I can see if we can get some, because we use this, we look at this all the time, every time that we're working on KISA especially. But I can see if we can get some posters for the schools. That's a really good idea, so that it's always in front of us.
It's on the KSDE website too.
Right, but it would be nice to post it, for example,
Print it.
in the rooms where, or we could create our own posters if they don't, but let me check first. Because it would be nice to have it in the rooms where we hold professional development or when we have PLCs, for when we are in person. So I'll find out, and if not, we can print our own.
Well, as soon as we adjourn here, Leslie, I'll go ahead and just send that to you so you have it whenever you're sending something. The next time you can just send it right out.
Do you have some words of wisdom, Randy? Like four words?
Didn't want to cut off a conversation, so are we good? Enjoy the rest of your Friday. Have a great weekend, everybody. Go Chiefs. And thank you, Marcia, for the time today. We appreciate all the work. And thank you all, to all of you, for the great dialogue. I mean, this is really, you all have put in some work today and these past months. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Rashid.
Thank you, Rashid. Everybody have
a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye, Leslie.
Thank you for your service, everyone. I don't say that enough.
Thank you, Marcia.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend.